So the freeze dryers had plenty of time to defrost after the green beans and onions. So we'll get it set up and ready for the next thing, which is fruit. It's going to be kind of apple pie flavored apple slices. So before I put the thermometer underneath, and I'm going to use my little grabber thing to grab the paper towel. And this grabber thing is something I've had for decades. It's for when you drop a nut or bolt down the spark plug hole on a car and you have to get it out before you start it, or you'll ruin the engine. That's what these are for. And for other things. I don't really know what it's called, but I've seen them on Amazon. They're just some kind of grabber thing. They're very similar to this still. They look like they're constructed a little different. I may have to get a new one and see how it compares to this. Maybe a little bit longer than this, because I also use this for cleaning the drain hose on the machine. And if it were a little longer, I could get all the way to the end of the drain hose from one side. But this portion of it has to be very skinny so that it fits inside the drain hose. And some of the ones I've looked at don't look like that part is as skinny. So anyway, I'm going to use this along the top edge to make sure that everything's cleaned out. So I'm looking for any kind of water, any kind of debris. And if I find anything, any kind of film of food or whatever on it, then I know it's time to tear things down and clean it. It's extremely rare that you ever find anything on it, and unless maybe if you do mini marshmallows and fill up the tray, then they'll start jumping off the edge. But other than that, there's pretty much nothing. Even this time, getting pretty much no water or anything. Yeah, so there's a couple little drops of water on it, and that's about it. So anyway, that's what I'm looking for. Is just trying to give it a quick wipe out, not a thorough cleaning or anything. But you could probably use that same kind of tool with like disinfectant wipes and fit down in a lot of these spaces to give it a quick clean once in a while and clean it more often that way. We haven't done it that way, but those are some of the things that might work. So now get the thermometer underneath, and thermometers are definitely not necessary for the freeze drying. I put a thermometer underneath because it gives me information about the barrel temperature. I like the thermometers in the food because it gives me information about the food temperature. This machine has one temperature probe, and it's on the bottom of this tray or this shelf, and it's about 7/8 of the way back. It's very close to the back end. So it gives me information of that one spot as far as temperature. I get no other information on temperature of the machine. Now, the ones that I add on the food, they give me the information about the temperature of the block of food. So if I've got a block of beef stew, I can find out what the center temperature of that block of food is instead of the underneath tray temperature. Sometimes it's markedly different, and sometimes it'll give you a heads up that it's getting closer to done. This machine, after the main dry cycle is 30 hours long, and if it keeps the pressure down low enough so it senses it's getting close to the end of the cycle, it will jump the rest of those 30 hours. I can usually tell 2 or 3 hours before that happens that it's getting close because of the temperature of the food. When they stay above 40-50 degrees and the pressure's low, I know it's getting close to jumping past the rest of that 30 hours. Anyway, but it's not necessary. And especially with the newer machines with the newer software, they seem to be considerably more sophisticated than this and have more information available. Okay, one more thing I want to show, the water from the green beans and onions. You can see it's a very full container, so it's more than a gallon. It's about 8.5, 8 3/4 pounds, maybe 9 pounds of water. So a nice big batch of that. And also people have talked about cross odors, like if you had, well, onions and green beans probably wouldn't be an issue, but if you had onions and apples, would it be a problem? And I don't know. We've never had anything that was a problem, and we have had different things on different trays, but we've never had onions and marshmallows or something that might be really disgusting combination mix. But I also don't smell anything out of this, and we had onions in here. Half the batch was onions practically. I think one of the things that helps is that almost 100% of things we put in is already pre-frozen. So we don't have room temperature things. Most things we put in here you can barely smell when you put them in because they're already frozen. And that might make a difference. And I'm probably not going to try shrimp and onions and marshmallows in the same batch, just in case it's really terrible. Anyway, let's get the front in place. Get it closed. Okay, I want to see that ring all the way around, and it is all the way around already. I want to make sure I see that even for pre-cooling, to make sure that there's no air leakage, and that because if the ice cold air is leaking through there, you can end up with a ring of ice on that seal, which then has to melt before it can seal properly. Okay, and I'm using Customize. You can use Start, especially on the newer ones, but when I use Customize, it gives me more information on the screen as it's operating. So Start and continue. It's 61 degrees inside right now. It won't take very long till it gets cold enough. We're going to be putting frozen apples in there with spices sprinkled on them, including sugar, which will lower the freezing point of the apples, so they will be sticky on the outside. They'll be wet because of the sugars. So I want to make sure that this is cold enough, at least as cold as the apples before we put the apples in there. The apples are going to be, the apples are in the freezer right now that's between 0 and 5 degrees. By the time we get them on trays, it could be 10 to 15 degrees. We definitely want this less than 20 degrees before we start putting them on the trays. So this will continue dropping as those continue warming, so that they don't have a chance to warm up when we put them in here. Okay, we'll be back as soon as this is cold enough, so don't go away, we'll be right back. So once again, been almost an hour, 15 minutes. It says it's -6. The thermometer underneath shows about a -35. So the barrel is quite cold, it's dropping quickly. It's definitely time to get the food in. So we'll move over to the other table and get the food on the trays and get them in as quick as possible. This is the back side of the cart, and so I've got the parchment under here, 4-pack. Okay. And so I've got the room for the parchment, the scales, some extra bags, more parchments, so all the different kinds of things. So tray 1, and these are going to be fairly full. Well, they all are. It's ready for apples. Going to move it on here for a second so that we can get apples on it. So we need about half the bag. In fact, if it would help, we could put both trays here, tray 1 and 2, and then it could pour them all out, because you know that you're going to need both trays for that bag. That might be fastest, because really, as long as they come out fairly even, it doesn't matter which tray it goes on either. And as always, nicely cleaned table for when we spill, which is inevitable. They'll be ready. And what's the mix on these? Got cinnamon, sugar, apple cider, spiced apple cider mix, nutmeg, ginger, allspice. Oh, the only bad thing is there's no spares. That looks really good. Okay, so tray 1, 1916. Doesn't matter if you get all the right numbers. If you don't put them in order, it gives them a different meaning. 1916. Okay, so tray 1 and tray 2. 1878. And then after we get them all, we'll just be stuffing thermometers into the general pile. There's the other 5-pound bag. So what's your plan on these? You're gonna just pour them out and then put it in there, on there?
Sprinkle.
Okay. Okay, well, this was one of the ways we were wondering how it would work. Yeah, this is a great way to buy a 40-pound box of apples. I mean, it's beautiful looking apples, ready to use. There's about $1.50 a pound, and there's no waste. That's pretty good. Tray 3, $18.49, and tray 4, $19.47. So I'm not bothering to drill into them at all. I'm just trying to tuck them in to the general space. It won't be perfect, but it'll give some information. Over to the freeze dryer and load them. All the apples are over here. Okay, with the apples over here, we'll get them loaded in there. And starting at the top with tray 1, and they are pretty full. Only got about 1/4 inch there above it. But they're not touching. They're not as tall as the ice cream was. That was ridiculous. And they worked. And we've done apples before. That one is a little tall. Okay, they're in. And thermometers are still showing less than 20 degrees on all of the trays. It looks like 10. This one's still down at 0, so it depends on where it is in the apples. And I could have drilled a hole in one apple and then put them in there. We've done that before. But time is of the essence with these. Okay, we've got a ring all the way around already. So these are ready to go. It's got 4.5 hours of freeze time left. But because it took so long for us to get them in there, I might bump that up if they're not getting cold fast enough. If the apples don't look like they're going to be all the way cold before it starts, I'll add a little more time. And if they're cold early, you can start it earlier. But anyway, other than that, it'll be about 2 days. We'll be back. Don't go away, it'll be just a second. The apples with the delicious sprinkled stuff on it has been going for about 40.5 hours. So the previous batches of apples that we did that were the same amount of apples took about 39.5 hours and 40.5 hours. So very similar to what this is now. But this still shows that it has 3 hours to go. All of the trays are up to at least 100 degrees and up to 125, 130 degrees. The pressure is down at 138, so the pressure is really low and has been for hours, but it still says it has 3 more hours to go. 3 hours, I'm going to be doing other stuff. So what I'm going to do is take it out and weigh it now and then put it back in, with the hopes that, judging from past batches, that maybe it's actually done now and it just doesn't know it yet. So we'll take it out, weigh it, put it back in, and then give it a few more hours and then come back and check it later. If it's not dry, well, no harm. If it is dry, well, then we'll be able to take it out the next time. So we'll jump past the rest of the time and get them out and get them back in. So we're going to down arrow past the last 3 hours.
Yeehaw!
And you can see the pressure says that it's very low, temperature's up. Get the drain valve opened. And get them checked. Tray 1. and I will rotate them. So 930, and I'm going to rotate that with tray 4, and that's 928, and so I'll put tray 4 up here, and tray 1 down here, and then tray 2 is 919, and tray 3, 910. Okay, so 3 I'll put up by 4, and 2 I'll put down here. Oh, should probably, well, they snap like they're dry. And these are sugary, so when we get these out, it will be important to get these bagged right away. I'm going to check this one again. So this was the tray that was the coldest. It was only 100 degrees. It feels fine. So we'll get them back in there and give it a few more hours and check it. Okay, get the drain valve closed. Drain valve is closed. And I'm going to add more dry time. And I did close it. And that's still cool enough. So I'm going to put it back to the 3 hours that it had left, and we can check it then. I put the 3 hours back on that it was saying that it needed, and so we'll come back and check it sometime between now and 3 hours, probably in 3 hours. So we'll see how that does and see if it's already dry that way. And we're back with the apples. The heater's been off for about 10.5 minutes now, so they've started to cool, but they're all over 100 degrees still, 120 mostly. So I'm going to actually add just a touch of time so that it can let them cool just a little bit more, because some types of fruit kind of get pliable because of all the sugars. So if I let them cool just a little bit, I can get that sweet spot between too cold and end up with condensation, and too warm and they're still pliable and it's hard to tell if they're dry. But by trusting the weight, I'm going to know if they're dry anyway. So I'm going to carefully make sure I get the up arrow, add 15 minutes, and because it was within the last 15 minutes, by adding that, it still doesn't turn the heaters back on, at least with my machine. So the heaters are still off, and I'm able to confirm that by 1, the temperature keeps dropping, the pressure keeps dropping, and 2, I have the power meter over there, and it would go to 1300 watts if the heaters came on, and it's still at 540. Yeah, so I'm pretty sure this is the first time that I've purposely showed letting it cool a little bit before I take it out. Sometimes I get here late and it's already started to cool, but if it's lower than maybe 60, well, probably 80 degrees, I don't like to take it out. I'm concerned that I'll end up getting condensation on it. Even though I know that at 80 degrees I'm not going to end up with any condensation on it, I just didn't want to take any chances, so I've always warmed it back up part way. So this is the first time I think I've done that on one of these videos, where I purposely wait for it to cool a little bit. So the bottom tray currently is at about 100. We're at about 112 on that one. About 116, 18, somewhere around there. About 114 on the top one. Wait a minute, that's 110. No, so that'd be about 104, 106 on that one. Sensor under the tray, which is the one that the display reads. So the display temperature here says 88. That's on the bottom of my second tray up, way in the back. You can see a little bump under the heater pad. That's where that sensor is for this particular one. And it says 87 now. So I don't want to wait too long, even though the food thermometers are still up. So when we get to 15, that will be 15 minutes of cool time. I think that will be the point. All right, so it's been more than 15 minutes of cooling now. It's down to 85 degrees on the bottom of that tray. I'm going to take them out now and check them for dry. Okay, so open the drain valve. And I've got the scale on. And we'll see if it was dry 3 hours ago. Because that's essentially what we're checking for, is whether or not it was dry 3 hours ago. Okay, tray 1. And the tray itself is starting to get cool. It's practically down to room temperature. And tray 1, that's 929. That's 1 gram in 3 hours. It could be good. So we'll go ahead and check the others to make sure. 918, that's 1 gram. Okay, make sure it's not sitting on any. 909. Okay, so far all of them are 1 gram in 3 full hours. That one's more. 925. That one's 3 grams. It's the one that was on the bottom, so it was in the coolest spot. So, yeah, they look great. They feel perfect. They're probably completely done because it's been 3 more hours, but with 3 grams on that and 1 for each of the others, there's no downside really to put it back in, except for the loss of time. There's no real downside on putting it back in for an hour or so. So I'm going to put that back in, and I'm going to put this one on rack spot 2 or 3, so the hottest ones. Okay, so this is the one that lost the most. I'm going to put it on this one, because these 2 middle ones are almost always slightly hotter than the outside 2. So I'm going to put that one on there. And 3, it was questionable. Nope, it's 1 gram. Yeah, so the other ones are not that important, so we'll just put them on in there. And it could probably take the other ones out that had only a 1 gram and just get them bagging now. But with any unsuredness of it, how's that for English? Might as well just put it in there. So we'll give it a short time, maybe hour, hour and a half, and make sure that it doesn't drop anymore. Because it went down just those few, just 3 grams in 3 hours. It's probably very dry by now, but it's hard to tell without checking it. And especially fruit, and especially sugary fruit, I want to make sure that every bit of moisture is out, and then it's bagged as quickly as possible, because it wants moisture back in it, and it'll pull that out of the air, and it'll pull it out quickly. So there's no reason to give it that chance. So let's get that resealed, and we'll get it restarted and give it a couple hours, and then kind of look at it, or maybe an hour and a half. Okay, so I'm going to put more dry time, close drain valve, and I can see it alongside here, so I always check, because trust me, it's happened. And continue, and go. And I'm going to go with hour and 3/4, but in an hour and a half the heaters will be off. Well, actually I'm going to go with an hour and a half and let it cool that little bit for the apples. We'll be back in an hour and a half and pull them out. I suspect that they're well and complete and all that. This is the 3rd batch of the apples from that 40-pound box, and it's the one that's taken the longest so far. This is 3 hours longer than the previous ones. It's an example of when people ask how long does it take? Well, it depends. These were the same kind of apples, loaded in the same way, almost identically, and yet this is 3 hours longer so far. Now, the fourth tray, it was on the bottom to start with. That does tend to be a cooler spot, and it was also loaded the heaviest. So maybe there was just a piece of fruit that was on top of another one, or it was too many layers on one particular spot, so it took longer to dry. For whatever reason, sometimes they take longer. It could be that the oil hadn't been changed as recent. A more humid day, a hotter day down here. There's so many variables involved. So that's going to be 10% longer than those previous batches. So that's the answer to how long does it take? I don't know, and it depends. And our older machine won't necessarily translate to your newer machine. Or if you have a different vacuum pump or a different size machine, it may not translate perfectly. But it's interesting. Okay, we'll be back in an hour and a half. So it's literally in the last few seconds of the additional time. We'll let that finish and we'll take them out and check them. So it's in the last couple of seconds and then it'll stop itself. So it's had 15 minutes to cool, and then we'll check them. Open the drain valve.
Yeehaw!
And so on the last check, we had one tray that had 3 grams loss, and one tray, and the other trays had 1 gram, and that was after 3 hours. I don't expect there to be any loss this time, but we'll check it. Clean that off. Tray 1. Make sure that's tray 1, and it is. Okay, no change, 929. And didn't really expect there to be a change because it had been very little to begin with. Tray 2, and that tray is starting to feel a little on the cool side. Tray 2, 918, so the same. Tray 3, and these are all the trays that had only gone down by 1. And still no change. Now, we'll check tray 4. It's the pesky one that it had gone down by 3. Okay, and it's about, well, it's basically 0. Somewhere between 0 and a fraction of a gram, because it's bouncing from the gram lower up to that one. And they know on this scale there's that fine point between there where it bounces, where it's basically a small fraction of a gram. Anyway, we're going to call that good. So no defrost, which makes it so much quieter. Oh, then I'll turn off or unplug the timer for the oil filter pump as soon as it's finished, and turn off the cooling fan. So we'll get these over there ready to bag and get the weights on them, and then get the time and everything on these. But the point is that now, after checking it after another hour and a half, with no weight loss, we know that they were dry an hour and a half ago. But because of the weight loss previous, we know that they weren't dry 3 hours before that. So sometime between 4.5 hours ago and 1.5 hours ago, they got dry. We'll use the hour and a half ago time as our time to write down. So when people ask how long does it take, we'll give them that time, even though we know it's not exactly accurate because we don't know exactly what it was. And it only counts for this machine loaded with this stuff exactly this way under all of these conditions today. So beyond that, it doesn't tell us really everything. I'll get that out of the way. The defrost fan in the door and the defrost baffle in, and we'll get it started so we can get it defrosted and ready Oh, and get the thermometer out from underneath. Okay, now for time, I'm going to go an hour and a half less than that. So going to use, basically I'm going to use 43 and a half hours. And that should be a pretty good representation. Power usage is 29.91 kilowatt hours. We'll reset it, get it ready for the next batch. Okay, now we're set for the next. So we've got all of the trays over here. We'll get the thermometers out and get the weights, and probably have to snack a couple. So get the thermometers out and get the final weights. So tray 1, 919. Tray 2, 99. And the trays are just barely warm still. And with the sugariness, they will start pulling in moisture real quick. I'll make sure that's zeroed out. So 901. And they'll pull moisture from your hands onto sugary things also. But you can still freeze dry sugary things. It does not seem to be a problem whatsoever. And 916. Are you staying there? Okay. Okay, and with that, I can get the math, but these, you're going to do more volume by volume as opposed to weight. You're not going to worry about how much specific is in each one, right? So it's more about how many cram into there. Okay, let me borrow this bag. So some of the bags are already labeled. It's batch number, what they are, the date that it went into the freeze dryer. And then for some people, it's more about how many do you want in there and not specific weight. And we do that with a lot of snack kind of items and things. We don't worry too much about weight, just what we can fit in the bag and what we want to have in that bag. So, and then these are testable. Oh, that's very good. Okay. We'll get the weights. Fourteen 1-quart bags and putting the 300cc oxygen absorbers in. And last but not least, gross weights of the bag. So add the gross weight to each bag before it gets stored. Huh. And it doesn't even work if you put the numbers in a different order. It means practically a different number. So 70 grams, not 07. We can do that one again. So 68 grams for the gross weight of that bag, And if it ever starts getting water in it, we'll know right away because it'll get heavier. Like the time that I cheaped out and bought thin bags because we were in a hurry and couldn't get our normal bags, so we bought bad bags, and 2 years later we found out they were getting heavier by about 3 or 4%, and so the water was going through the bag. With all of these bags, water is going to be going through this bag, and oxygen is going to go through the bag basically forever, or until it reaches equilibrium with the surrounding air around it. It's going to try to get the same. So it's going to be having oxygen and water go in. The only thing you can do is use the best bag you can to slow it down as much as possible, and then add an oxygen absorber inside to try to capture that oxygen that does get in so that it doesn't damage your food. But rest assured, it is going through that bag. Now, if you've got a really, really good bag, and you're like me, you'll be dead before it's a problem. But our bad bags, in just a couple years, it was noticeable. We lost a little bit of product, but not everything in those bags. A lot of the stuff still survived, and we re-dried it.
And put it in good bags.
Yes, re-dried it and then put it in good bags. And the bad bags can be punished.
Yeah, threw them away.
Okay, so next, these can go in the bin for storage. The sliced apples with the apple pie spice are all bagged up. Got 14 1-quart bags. It works out to about 11.4 ounces per bag this way, which is more than a whole apple. It's probably an apple and a half, 2 apples, because they've already were peeled and sliced and cored. So it's probably the equivalent of close to 2 apples with very little work. It's a great way to go. Anyway, those will go into the J bin, and then we'll get ready for the next thing as soon as the freeze dryer is defrosted. And the next thing is going to be chocolate mousse. So it's chocolate and cream cheese all mixed in together. It's delicious and wonderful and moussey, and it freeze dries great, and it stores great. I don't know if it's good for 10 years or 5 years. We only know for sure that it's good for 2 or 3 years. And it's really good for that amount of time. I don't see any issues with it over that amount of time, so I'm going to say it's good for at least that long. So as soon as these are done, we'll move on to chocolate mousse. And if we don't have enough chocolate mousse to fill the 4 trays, we have peanut butter chocolate chip cookies, which has peanut butter in it, which is a lot of fat, and chocolate chips, which are good for you. So that's what's going to go in there. They're just little cookies like this big around. They're a great little snack. There's not a lot of water in the mousse or the chocolate chip cookies. They freeze dry pretty quickly. Don't know exactly the mix until we do it. So we'll get this done and move on to the next thing. All right, so here's the last couple of batches with the sucked down bags of green beans and the chopped onions and the other things. So next, we'll add the sliced apples to it. Just trying to keep the layers fairly even. Mostly to keep it from shifting around when you move them. Otherwise, you could just toss them in any old way you want. It's not going to hurt them, as long as you don't poke holes in them. Okay, the apples are in there. Again, as soon as the freeze dryer is defrosted, on to the next thing. mousse and chocolate chip cookies, peanut butter chocolate chip cookies. Okay, moving on.